The Khazars. The Empire of the Steppes. By René Grousset. At the beginning of the 7th century, the southwestern part of the Russian steppe and Dagestan had witnessed the rise of the Khazar Empire. The Khazars were a Turkic people who worshipped Tangri and were governed by Kargans and Tarkhans. Barthold suggests that they represent a branch of the Western Turks, or, perhaps more accurately, the Western Huns. They were already a powerful nation when in 626 their Khan Zebel, at the request of Heraclius at a meeting in Tiflis, lent the Byzantine emperor 40,000 men to make war on Persia, a reinforcement with which Heraclius laid waste the Sassanid province of Azerbaijan. The alliance thus formed between Byzantium and the Khazars was renewed many times by royal marriages. Emperor Justinian II, at the time of his exile, 695 to 705, took refuge with the Khazars and married one of the Kargan sisters, who became the Basilissa Theodora. Constantine V in his turn in 732 married a Khazar Kargan's daughter who became the Basilissa Irene. Their son, Emperor Leo IV, is known by the cognomen of Leo the Khazar, 775 to 780. This system of alliance arrangements was most useful to the Byzantines in their battles against the Arabs, whom the Khazars would take in the rear in Transcaucasia, for example, in 764, while the Byzantine armies attacked in Asia Minor. The cordial attitude of the Byzantine court toward the Khazars may be accounted for in other ways. The Khazars were by far the most civilized people of Turkic Europe, as the Uyghur were to be of the Turks of Central Asia. Although they had never adopted a sedentary or agricultural way of life, as is sometimes said, they had built up a coherent state, enriched by trade and with a relatively high culture, thanks to their contact with Byzantium and with the Arab world. This state appears to have been centered at first in the area of the Turek steppes. The first Khazar capital, Balanjar, has been located by Marquardt at the source of the Sulak, a southern tributary of the Turek. After its destruction by the Arabs in 722–23, the royal residence was transferred to the town known to the Arabs as Ulbaidar, the White City, a name which Marquardt seeks to amend to Sarigshah, the Turkic term for Yellow City, or better still, as Minasky thinks, Sarishin, that is to say, Saksin. Marquardt locates this city at the same site as that occupied by the later capital of Itil, at the mouth of the Volga. Itil, incidentally, was only the winter residence of the Khazar Kargans. In summer they roamed, like their nomadic ancestors the Shungnu, across the steppe, most likely in the direction of the Kuban. In 833, desiring to possess a headquarters less exposed to roving hordes, they appealed to the Byzantine Emperor Theophilus for engineers to build them a fortified capital. Theophilus sent them the protospathir, chief engineer, Petronus, who helped them to construct this third capital, Sarkel, which stood either at the mouth or, more probably, at the great bend of the Don. On the ruins of old Phanagoria in the Taman Peninsula, opposite the Crimea, the Khazars further erected the trading post of Matarka. The Khazar Empire was the center of a brisk trade. Byzantine, Arab, and Jewish merchants flocked to Itil and Sarkel in quest of pelts from the north. With them, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism found foothold in the country. Between 851 and 863, Byzantium sent to the Khazars the apostle Saint Cyril, who was warmly welcomed. Biographies of Saint Cyril show him debating with Jewish rabbis at the Kargan's table. In the reign of Leo VI, Matarka was the seat of a Byzantine bishopric, founded for the dissemination of the gospel throughout Khazaria. Islam too, represented by numerous Arab residents, made many converts from 690 onward and, from 868 and above all after 965, was to become one of the major religions of the region. Judaism was in even greater favor. In 767, Isaac Sangari began his ministry among the Khazars. Marzudi declares that under the caliphate of Harun ar-Rashid, 786–809, the Khazar Khagan and nobility embraced this religion. The persecution of the Jews instigated by the Byzantine Emperor Romanus Lecapenus, 919–44, drew a great number of Israelite refugees into the country. A Khagan, who had assumed the biblical name of Joseph, is said to have written in 948 to the Rabbi Shizdai to describe the thriving state of Khazar Judaism, but Marquardt doubts the authenticity of this famous letter, which seems to date from no earlier than the 11th century. According to the Rizla of Ibn Fadden, the Khagan, the viceroy, the prince of Samandar, in Dagestan, and other dignitaries professed Judaism. By way of reprisals for the destruction of synagogues on Islamic territory, one of the Khagans demolished a minaret. Nevertheless, among the people, Muslims and Christians seem to have outnumbered the Jews. Around 965 a Khagan is said to have embraced Islam for political reasons, but in 1016 the Khan of the Taman Peninsula was a Christian Khazar by the name of Georgios Tsoulos. In the 9th century, the Khazars began to decline politically. These civilized Turks of Judaic faith were to be swept away by hordes of their own race who had remained untamed pagans. Once more the steppe was in a state of flux. The Oghuz Turks from the Aral steppes, the Uzoi of Byzantine writers, drove the Pecheneg Turks of the Emba region and the river Ural toward the west. Around 850–60 the Pechenegs, crossing territories that were subject to the Khazar Empire, dislodged the Magyars, who were clients of the Khazars, from the northern coasts of the Sea of Azov. As has been seen, the Magyars then withdrew to Atalkuzu, between the Dnieper and the lower Danube. Soon, between 889 and 893, the Pechenegs renewed their pursuit of the Magyars, dislodged them from their new area, and finally settled there themselves, thus occupying all that part of the Russian steppe lying between the mouth of the Don and Moldavia. The Khazars retained only the country between the lower reaches of the Don, the lower Volga, and the Caucasus. In 965 the Russian Prince of Kiev, Sviatoslav, attacked the Khazars and took possession of their capital, Sarkel, on the Great Bend of the Don. However, as Barthold observes, the Khazar Khanate survived this disaster, or at least it retained the territories of the lower Volga and of the Kuban and Dagestan steppe. In 1016 the Byzantine Emperor Basil II sent a fleet, supported by a Russian army, against the last of the Khazars. These combined forces seized the Taman Peninsula and the Khazar dependencies in the Crimea. By 1030 the Khazars had disappeared as a political power. The Byzantines had miscalculated badly, however, in helping the Russians to crush these civilized Turks, the oldest and most faithful allies of the empire. In place of the Khazars, wild hordes were to seize control of the Pontic steppes.